I was 34 when widowhood arrived, like a sudden frost over a garden I had tended for more than a decade. Boston had just shaken the last of winter from its shoulders when my husband, Adam, walked out the door with a headache and never came back. A brain aneurysm snatching him from a life that had been built on careful promises and quiet devotion. We had met 12 years earlier at a charity auction for children with cancer, where he outbid everyone for a watercolor of the skyline at sunset. And then, with an ease that felt like gravity, pressed the painting into my hands because he had noticed me admiring it. That small act opened the rest of our story. Our first date the next evening. Our engagement, months later by the harbor. Our Victorian in Beacon Hill, purchased for $800,000 when he made partner, and my interior design business was beginning to hum. We learned to survive heartbreak when fertility treatments drained our savings and our imaginations, and we rebuilt on other dreams instead: travel, work, and a home renovated room by room until it reflected the life we had decided would be enough. Adam did what he always did: remembered names, kept confidences, collected the details of other people's lives and treated them as valuable. I did what I always did: organized beauty into spaces that held people together. My sister, Cassandra, hovered at the edges of those years like the echo of a song that never fully fades. Charming, dramatic, sometimes a storm, often a riddle my parents tried eternally to solve. She changed jobs, changed men, and changed her mind, but never her conviction that I had somehow taken more than my fair share of the world. 2 years before Adam died, she announced a pregnancy with a bartender named Tyler. And I swallowed the old ache and decided to be the kind of aunt who shows up with flowers and handmade blankets anyway. When Adam began keeping distance from the baby, I told myself, some grief can only be carried in private. Then came the Tuesday morning that ended with a call from a hospital and a word, gone, that broke the grammar of my life. During the week that followed, Cassandra drifted in and out as if my sorrow were a room she was allergic to. And when Lucas's first birthday arrived 1 week later, I went to the party because my mother insisted that Adam would have wanted family first, even when family feels like a knot you cannot untie. The backyard was a stage set for happiness. I recognized the whispering ensemble by the way they fell quiet when I passed. My parents looked as if the bench had become a witness stand. Cassandra appeared with Lucas on her hip, and the kind of confidence that usually announces an award or a confession. She chose the confession. She said the child was Adam's, said there had been an affair, said Adam had updated his will and that half of my house belonged to Lucas. She even produced a document. The yard rippled with reactions, gasps, stares, pity. And under all of that, a current of disbelief ran through me so strong I nearly laughed. In my hands, the supposed will wore mistakes like smudges, vocabulary that did not sound like a lawyer's work, a signature whose lines I knew intimately and yet did not trust. I returned the paper, left the party, and sat in my car laughing until the laughter turned to tears for all the things grief can be: rage, love, fatigue, and the wild relief of remembering a truth the other person does not know. Years earlier, after Cassandra crossed boundaries that began with flirtation and threatened deeper harm, Adam had recorded everything: dates, messages, my parents' minimizations, and then, following a surgery for a painful varicocele, he and his doctor decided to perform a vasectomy during the same procedure. 2 years before Lucas existed, Adam had become biologically incapable of fathering a child. The only people who knew were our attorney, the doctors, and us. Adam placed the medical records, his legitimate will, and his notes in a safe deposit box, because preparation, to him, was a form of love. The morning after the party, I went to the bank at 9 a.m., and in the quiet room where memory lives in envelopes, I opened the proof that Cassandra's story could not be true. I carried the documents to James Wilson, the kind of attorney whose office reads like a library and whose compassion arrives before his advice. He studied the forged will and called it amateurish, the legal language incorrect, and the signature a poor imitation that would not survive expert scrutiny. He reminded me that grief does not negate the need for evidence. It multiplies it. Then he introduced Frank Delaney, a private investigator who wore competence like a uniform and began asking questions that exposed how little I knew about my sister's current life. In 3 days, Frank assembled a ledger of desperation. $75,000 in debt braided through credit cards and loans, medical bills for Lucas after a heart surgery, an eviction notice threatening to uproot them by the end of the month if 4 months of back rent remained unpaid. A bartender named Tyler with a history that read like a cautionary tale, including violence in a previous relationship and a warrant for unpaid child support. Frank also retrieved text messages between Cassandra and her friend Jenna that converted grief into strategy. In those messages, Cassandra described Adam's death as an opportunity, guessed our home's value, bragged about a friend named Dave who could lift Adam's signature from an online auction and paste it onto a document, and framed her plan not as theft, but as a rebalancing of the scales. Reading those lines left me oddly calm. Clarity can be a relief when chaos has been masquerading as concern. James laid out my options: prosecute for forgery and attempted fraud, or confront privately with evidence and boundaries. The first option would probably succeed and perhaps feel just, but Lucas would suffer, and my parents would turn punishment into a new family wound. The second option would demand a choreography of compassion and consequences, a dual allegiance to truth and to a child who did not ask to be born into our family's broken math. I went home and called my therapist, Dr. Laurel Chen, who has a gift for moving the furniture of a problem around until you recognize the room again. She said compassion without boundaries is self-erasure, and boundaries without compassion become fortresses. She did not tell me what to do, but she held a mirror so I could remember who I am when I am not being told what a good daughter or sister should be. The next morning, I invited Cassandra to meet at 2 p.m. I prepared the living room the way I prepare any space for difficult truth: clean surfaces, water within reach, evidence arranged in an order that makes comprehension possible. I asked for her consent to record because Massachusetts law requires 2 parties to agree, and because transparency has a way of narrowing escape routes for future lies. She arrived, looking styled rather than steady, and delivered a narrative about secret hotel meetings, marital dissatisfaction, and a child conceived during a season of supposed distance between Adam and me. The story fractured under ordinary questions. Dates did not match work calendars. Details that intimacy always remembers came out generic or contradictory. When she accelerated toward impatience, I placed Adam's medical records on the table, then the notarized will that left everything to me, then the journal entries documenting her advances and our parents' reluctance to acknowledge patterns that had been obvious to us. I let the silence do some of the work. Silence often tells the truth faster than anger. Cassandra cried in a way I had not seen since we were girls and she skinned a knee on the sidewalk. Real, heavy, unpretty sobs that made her admit to the forgery and confess that the affair never happened. She said she was drowning. She said she envied the life I had built. She said that desperation corrodes judgment. All of those things can be true and still be wrong. I told her I would not press charges if she accepted accountability. a public confession to our family that she had lied, an agreement never to repeat the claim, therapy and financial counseling, stable work, and the chance for me to help Lucas, not by giving up half my house, but by establishing a trust for his medical care and education. I would be involved in his life, not as a replacement father, but as an aunt who refuses to participate in secrets, boundaries, and support, together, because that is the only formula that rescues without enabling. Cassandra agreed, stunned by mercy she had not earned. The family dinner unfolded like a play in which everyone discovers they have been cast as themselves. My mother arrived with lasagna, the dish she builds when apologies are needed but words are stubborn. My father set his jaw the way he does when the world is both too much and exactly what it has always been. I recorded the conversation with everyone's permission, because memory, poorly kept, can be as dangerous as a lie. Cassandra spoke first and named what she had done: the false claim about an affair, the forged will, the attempt to redistribute grief into profit. Our parents moved through a predictable choreography: shock to sympathy for the child they always believed needed rescuing. When my mother asked if I would send my sister to jail, I said I could, and explained why the law might agree. The word family sometimes gets used like a magic spell meant to erase harm. I told them it does not work that way. My father, to his credit, heard the tremor in my voice and said he was proud of me, the way he once said it when I won a scholarship in high school, but with more weight now, as if he understood that survival is an accomplishment too. Cassandra surprised us by accepting responsibility without the usual negotiations. She said bailouts had taught her the wrong lessons. She said she wanted to change because Lucas needed a mother who tells the truth out loud. We wrote down the agreement, then promised to take it to James the next morning for signatures, because a boundary is most useful when it is not an imaginary line. In the weeks that followed, the arrangement began to function like a splint after a fracture. I established the trust for Lucas, structured so that funds paid directly for medical bills, childcare, and education, not for the noise of adult impulses. Cassandra started therapy and reported what she was learning about the old engine that drove her envy, the story she had believed since childhood that love is attention, and attention must be taken if it is not given. She accepted a position as an office manager at a dental practice with regular hours, health care, and a paycheck that arrived not like a miracle, but a schedule. I took Lucas to the park on Saturday mornings and let him tug at the world with a toddler's conviction that everything can be touched. I grieved Adam in the strange ways people grieve, by talking to a garden, by sorting closets at 11 p.m., by standing in doorways waiting for the ghost of footsteps that do not come. The support group I joined met every Wednesday at 7 p.m. in a church basement, where the coffee tasted like cardboard and the honesty tasted like medicine. We rarely offered solutions. We practiced witness. I kept working, and clients kept asking for homes that felt like safety, and I began to tell the truth that safety is a discipline, more than a mood. I established a foundation in Adam's name for students who want to study corporate law but lack the money ladders others climb. I did it because legacies should look like the person they honor. Adam was a lawyer who treated the profession as an ethical craft rather than a game. When I stood at the first fundraiser and listened to applicants talk about why law matters, I felt both the emptiness where he should have been and the presence of the work he loved. Grief is a season that keeps changing its weather. Some days you get rain and call it relief. Frank's report about Tyler complicated and clarified everything at once. Cassandra had chosen a partner who threatened stability by design, a man who treated responsibility like a door he prefers to exit through. Knowing that, I adjusted the trust so that Tyler could never use it as a lever. Legal instruments can be written to keep predatory hands from gentle money. I also hired a family advocate to help Cassandra navigate services she had not known how to access, subsidized childcare, payment plans with the hospital, and a schedule that accommodated therapy appointments. Accountability without tools is another way to engineer failure. I refused to design a trap and call it growth. My parents tested the new boundaries as if they were flimsy, especially my mother, who had built her identity on smoothing Cassandra's path and could not immediately understand that smooth roads sometimes lead to cliffs. We talked more than we had in years. I said I would not be the daughter who performs forgiveness while swallowing resentment. I said I would not accept the old narrative, in which my competence meant I did not need care. My father began to hear me first, and then to translate for my mother, in the way long marriages sometimes learn to bridge difference. He stopped calling Cassandra's behavior mistakes, and started calling them choices. He stopped calling mine strength, and started calling it labor. The difference mattered. By the end of summer, Cassandra had stayed the course long enough that I recognized something like humility instead of performance. Therapy had taught her the vocabulary of patterns. Work had taught her the quiet pride of predictable days. We were not close, not yet, but the ice had thinned, and conversations could float without sinking. Lucas bounded through our Saturdays with the determination of a child who has survived doctors and decided the world owes him a playground. His heart condition remained a companion rather than a jailer, and the trust took care of bills with the steadiness that dignity requires. During this period, I met Michael, a professor of ethics whose humor is dry enough to keep me from drowning in sentimentality, and whose gentleness refuses to hurry whatever new life is trying to begin. We spoke at a fundraiser where he asked questions about the foundation rather than congratulating me, as if grief were a finish line I had crossed. He said ethics is the story of how we live with one another's vulnerability. That sentence turned over in my mind for days, then months. We moved slowly by design. Coffee after board meetings, a walk along the river, dinners that ended early, because pacing can be a kind of fidelity to what came before. He understood Adam would never be a closed chapter. He understood that love is not a replacement part. Through all of it, I kept returning to the evidence Adam had left in the safe deposit box, the way his careful foresight had shielded me when the worst part of our family tried to exploit the worst week of my life. Preparation is not pessimism. It is tenderness that understands the world. I scanned the records, stored copies with James, and organized my own papers with a thoroughness that would have made Adam laugh. I also wrote a letter to myself for the next emergency, because grief taught me that, during crisis, the brain forgets simple things, like where the passport lives, and how to feed yourself at 8 p.m. Compassion for your future self is a habit that makes recovery possible. A year after Adam's death, spring returned with daffodils he had planted the previous fall and never got to see bloom. The sight of yellow felt like both an arrival and a letter, proof that care outlives the caretaker. By then, the agreement with Cassandra had become something sturdier than a truce. She had completed 6 months of therapy and enrolled in a financial literacy program that replaced the adrenaline of crisis with the steadiness of a budget. She apologized to our extended family at a small gathering where reputations and misunderstandings had multiplied. And though not everyone forgave, at least the narrative stopped shapeshifting. She and I kept our distance in the way two people might cautiously approach a bridge they are rebuilding plank by plank. We planned Lucas's second birthday with restraint. A smaller backyard, fewer guests, no speeches, just a cake and a child who had earned an ordinary day. My parents adjusted too. My mother learned to call me not for help with Cassandra, but to ask how I was eating and sleeping. She practiced hearing my boundaries without arguing them into softer shapes. And when she slipped, she corrected herself. My father found ways to admire Cassandra's work ethic the same way he once admired mine, not as comparison, but as recognition. The old family triangle, rescuer, problem, proof, loosened. The foundation grew beyond seedling stage. I watched scholarship students argue cases in moot court with the seriousness of people who know the law can be both weapon and shield. Some visited my office to thank me, and I told them the truth. The foundation exists because love asked for a monument that looks like opportunity rather than stone. When I sat with the board at 6:30 p.m. and talked about budgets, I felt a version of peace that does not deny sadness. It places sadness in a room where other things are also happening. Michael met my parents eventually. He listened to my father tell stories, and he did the dishes with my mother without being asked. Not as performance, but as practice. He never reached for comparisons to Adam, and for that, I felt gratitude rather than guilt. Slowly, I learned the difference between moving on and moving forward. I kept attending the grief group because healing is not a staircase you climb once. New people arrived with fresh losses, and I became the person who passed the coffee and said the thing you say when you have learned how survival works. This feels impossible until you notice you are doing it. On the anniversary morning, I stood in the garden and thought about boundaries and documentation, about how they are the practical forms love takes when talk stops working. If I had accepted Cassandra's claim without evidence, I would have given up half my home and betrayed the truth Adam lived by. If I had chosen punishment without any path for repair, I would have orphaned a child from the kind of family involvement that could help him. Instead, we built something in the middle, a map with landmarks both firm and kind. The map held even when tested again, because families are laboratories where the same experiment gets repeated until the chemistry changes. Cassandra stumbled one autumn, missed a counseling appointment, floated a request for cash that bypassed the trust's rules, and bristled when I said no. We recovered by reviewing the agreement and naming the fear underneath the ask. She worried the stability might be temporary and wanted insurance against the next storm. I told her the insurance was the structure itself and the habit of showing up for her own life. She returned to therapy, and a month later, apologized without prompting. The apology did not erase the stumble, but it noted growth, the way children pencil a line on a doorframe to mark height. Lucas grew into a sturdy, curious boy who believed that every adult in his orbit was an audience for his discoveries. The hospital reduced his appointments as his heart stabilized, and we celebrated by letting him pick the color of his new bicycle. He chose yellow because daffodils had taught him that yellow is confidence. Tyler resurfaced briefly, and the court system did what systems sometimes do: too little and too late. But the trust's architecture held. He could not access funds. He could not rewrite the story with threats. Cassandra, armed with a counselor and a lawyer who understood boundaries, declined his attempts to shame her into chaos. In those weeks, I understood with new clarity that documentation is not only about proof in a courtroom. It is a shield for the nervous system. It lets you sleep. It lets you refuse manipulation without drowning in doubt. Work flourished. I designed a hospice family lounge where light could find the faces of people in waiting. And I remembered how design is a species of kindness when done right. I mentored 2 scholarship recipients who wanted to clerk for judges known more for rigor than fame. And I said rigor is a love language in certain professions. Michael and I reached the conversation people dread and hope for in equal measure. The one about whether this new love could fit alongside the old one without trimming either. We decided it could. He asked what rituals I wanted to keep, and I said Saturday mornings in the garden and a pause at 9 p.m. when I look at the painting Adam once gave me. Not to worship the past, but to greet it. Michael nodded and said continuity is a kind of honesty. That winter, snow layered the city and the house held its warmth, and I realized that moving forward had not required me to abandon any part of my story. It had asked me to arrange the parts so they could coexist without contradiction. When spring returned again, it brought a ceremony for the Foundation's first graduating scholars, and a small family gathering that felt ordinary in a way I had stopped believing we could manage. Cassandra arrived early to help set out food, and my mother told a neighbor, not for show, but for truth, that both her daughters were doing well by different routes. My father took Lucas to inspect the daffodils and explained that his uncle had planted them so we would have color after winter, which is another way of saying that love thinks ahead. I stood in the garden and allowed myself to feel the whole braid of it, loss and repair, anger and forgiveness that is not forgetfulness, boundaries that invite better behavior, and the way preparation can be a form of devotion. The moral I carry now is simple and difficult. Protect yourself with documents and with the courage to say no, and protect your heart with the kind of grace that does not confuse leniency with love. The people who truly love you will meet you at the boundary and bring their papers too. Proof of effort, proof of change, proof that they understand safety is not a punishment, but a promise. If anyone listening has lived through betrayal that came dressed as family, I can only tell you what saved me. I gathered evidence because truth should not have to shout to be heard. I set boundaries because grief is too heavy to carry while holding someone else's chaos. I accepted help because independence is not the same as isolation. And when the time came, I chose a solution that preserved a child's future while honoring my husband's memory and my own dignity. Healing did not arrive as a single triumph. It arrived as practice. Therapy appointments kept, financial plans followed, friendships maintained, mornings watered, evenings remembered, and a heart willing to hold pain in one hand and possibility in the other. If you have faced a season like this, I hope you will choose the version of strength that does not require hardness, and the version of kindness that does not require self-abandonment. If this story stayed with you, consider showing your support the way communities keep each other going. Please like to help it reach someone who needs it. Share if you know a friend wrestling with family boundaries. Subscribe for more stories about resilience and honest love. And comment with how you have set a boundary that protected your peace. Your voice helps others feel less alone and helps this channel keep telling the truth with care.